A major diplomatic shock is unfolding in West Africa after Burkina Faso and Mali announced strong retaliatory measures against the United States, including restrictions that amount to a ban on American presence in key areas. The decision, described by officials as a matter of sovereignty and national security, marks one of the sharpest confrontations yet between Sahel military governments and Washington. The move has sent waves across Africa and raised serious questions about the future of international cooperation in a region already under heavy pressure. Authorities in both Burkina Faso and Mali say the action is a direct response to what they describe as repeated interference, pressure, and disrespect from the United States. In recent months, relations between the Sahel states and Western powers have steadily worsened. American officials have criticized military rule, raised concerns about governance and human rights, and warned about new foreign partnerships forming in the region. Leaders in Ouagadougou and Bamako say these statements crossed a line. Government spokespeople stressed that their countries are fighting for survival against armed violence and instability, and that external criticism has not helped improve security. Instead, they argue, past partnerships failed to deliver peace while limiting national freedom of action. The new measures, they say, are meant to protect national dignity and send a clear signal that decisions about the Sahel will be made in the Sahel. The announcement immediately drew attention because of its scale and symbolism. For years, the United States played an important role in security cooperation, intelligence sharing, and development support in both countries. A move to block American involvement represents a dramatic break from the past and reflects a deeper shift in political thinking among Sahel leaders. This moment is important not only for Burkina Faso and Mali, but for Africa as a whole. It shows a growing willingness among some African governments to openly confront global powers and reshape old relationships. Supporters see it as a bold stand for independence. Critics warn it could deepen isolation and increase risk in an already fragile region. As the news spreads, governments, analysts, and citizens across the continent are closely watching. The decision raises urgent questions about security, diplomacy, and Africa's place in a changing world. Part 1 sets the stage for a deeper look at how this confrontation began, why it matters now, and what it could mean for the future of the Sahel and global politics.
The dramatic decision by Burkina Faso and Mali did not happen overnight. It is the result of a long and difficult breakdown in relations between the Sahel states and the United States, shaped by years of insecurity, political change, and growing mistrust. To understand why leaders in Ouagadougou and Bamako felt pushed to take such a strong step, it is necessary to look at how cooperation slowly turned into confrontation. For more than a decade, the United States was deeply involved in the Sahel, especially after armed groups expanded across Mali and later into Burkina Faso. Washington provided military training, intelligence support, equipment, and development aid, saying its goal was to help local forces restore stability and protect civilians. At first, these partnerships were welcomed as governments struggled to control large and dangerous territories. Over time, however, violence continued to spread. Armed attacks became more frequent, civilians were displaced in large numbers, and trust in existing political systems collapsed. Many citizens began to question whether foreign-backed security strategies were working at all. When military officers seized power in Mali in 2020 and later in Burkina Faso in 2022, they blamed both past civilian leaders and international partners for failing to protect the population. The situation grew tenser as the United States openly criticized the coups and called for a return to civilian rule. American officials also raised concerns about human rights and warned against new security partnerships that were forming outside Western influence. While Washington said these warnings were based on democratic principles, Sahel leaders saw them as pressure and interference during a time of national emergency. Each public statement added to the strain. In Bamako and Ouagadougou, leaders argued that they were being judged without understanding the reality on the ground. They pointed out that insecurity had worsened even during years of close cooperation with Western forces. In their view, criticism without results had become unacceptable. The creation of new regional alliances among Sahel states further changed the situation. Mali and Burkina Faso, later joined by Niger, began coordinating policies and speaking with a more unified voice. This unity gave leaders confidence to respond more forcefully to outside pressure, including from the United States. By the time the latest measures were announced, trust was already deeply damaged. What the world is seeing now is the result of years of tension finally reaching a breaking point. In the next part, attention will turn to what exactly the new restrictions mean and how they are expected to affect diplomacy, security, and daily life in the region.
The decision by Burkina Faso and Mali to restrict American presence is not just a political message. It brings real and immediate changes on the ground, especially in diplomacy, security cooperation, and development work. Officials in both countries say the measures are meant to limit American involvement in sensitive areas, including military cooperation, advisory roles, and certain diplomatic activities. In practical terms, this means American military advisors and related personnel are no longer welcome to operate as they once did. Joint programs that involved training, intelligence sharing, and strategic planning are expected to be reduced or fully suspended. For years, these programs were central to U.S. engagement in the Sahel, and their removal marks a clear break from past policy. Diplomatically, the ban sends a strong signal. By taking such a public step, Burkina Faso and Mali are showing they are ready to accept the consequences of distancing themselves from Washington. Officials say their sovereignty comes first, even if it means losing support from powerful partners. This stance reflects a broader belief among Sahel leaders that respect matters more than approval. The impact will also be felt in development and humanitarian work. Many aid programs rely on cooperation between governments and international partners. Although officials insist humanitarian assistance will not be blocked, experts warn that strained relations can complicate coordination, funding, and access. In a region where millions depend on aid, even small disruptions can have serious effects. Security analysts are divided on what comes next. Supporters of the move argue that American involvement did not stop violence and that new strategies are needed. Critics worry that losing access to intelligence and technical support could weaken already overstretched local forces. Armed groups operating in remote areas may attempt to exploit any gaps created by reduced cooperation. For ordinary citizens, the changes may not be immediately visible, but the long-term effects could be significant. Security conditions influence whether people can farm, trade, or send children to school. Diplomatic choices made at the top eventually shape daily life on the ground. So, this shows that this is not just a symbolic act. It represents a deep shift in how Burkina Faso and Mali choose to engage with the world. In the next part, the focus will move to how the United States is responding and what this confrontation means for American influence in Africa.
The announcement from Burkina Faso and Mali has forced the United States to respond carefully but firmly as Washington faces one of its most serious challenges in Africa in recent years. American officials have expressed concern over the decision, warning that cutting cooperation could harm regional security and undermine efforts to protect civilians in the Sahel. At the same time, the U.S. has avoided harsh language, showing how sensitive and complex the situation has become. U.S. officials maintained that their engagement in the Sahel was intended to support stability, counter armed groups, and strengthen local institutions. They argue that cooperation was based on shared security goals and mutual benefit. From Washington's perspective, restricting American presence risks weakening coordination at a time when armed violence remains a major threat not only to the region but to international security as well. Behind closed doors, however, there is growing recognition in U.S. policy circles that its influence in parts of Africa is shrinking. Analysts say the strong stance taken by Burkina Faso and Mali reflects a wider trend in which some African governments are no longer willing to accept advice or pressure from traditional partners. This reality is forcing Washington to rethink how it communicates and engages with African states. The United States has also emphasized concerns about governance and human rights, repeating that long-term stability cannot be built through military rule alone. Sahel leaders strongly reject this view, arguing that security must come first and that their countries cannot afford political experiments while under attack. This fundamental disagreement lies at the heart of the current confrontation. Despite the tension, American officials have left the door open for dialogue. They say cooperation could resume if mutual respect is restored and shared interests are clearly defined. However, trust has been badly damaged, and rebuilding it will take time and compromise from both sides. This moment is significant because it highlights a shift in global power relations. The United States, once seen as an unquestioned partner in the region, is now being openly challenged. How Washington adapts will influence not only its future role in the Sahel, but its wider relationship with Africa. In the next part, attention will turn to how other African countries and regional organizations are reacting to this confrontation, and whether this move by Burkina Faso and Mali could inspire similar actions elsewhere on the continent.
The strong action taken by Burkina Faso and Mali has not gone unnoticed across Africa. From West Africa to Central and Southern Africa, political leaders, analysts, and ordinary citizens are closely watching how this confrontation unfolds. For many, it raises important questions about sovereignty, partnerships, and the future of Africa's relations with powerful global players. Regional organizations have responded with caution. Some African leaders worry that rising tensions with major partners could further isolate fragile states and reduce access to aid and investment. Others, however, see the move as a bold stand that reflects growing confidence among African governments to set their own terms. The division shows how complex and sensitive the issue of foreign influence remains on the continent. Public opinion in many African countries appears mixed but highly engaged. On social media and in public debates, many voices praise the Sahel leaders for standing up to external pressure. They argue that African nations must be free to choose their security and development partners without threats or conditions. At the same time, critics warn that cutting ties with the United States could bring economic and security risks that poorer countries can ill afford. Beyond Africa, global powers are also paying close attention. Countries such as Russia, China, and others see the situation as evidence of shifting alliances. Analysts say these actors may seek to deepen their presence in the Sahel by offering alternative forms of cooperation. This growing competition could reshape the geopolitical map of the region in the coming years. The situation also puts pressure on neighboring states. Governments that still cooperate closely with Western partners must now balance those relationships with growing regional solidarity. No country wants to be seen as isolated or out of step with its neighbors, especially at a time when regional unity is being emphasized. This makes clear that this decision goes far beyond Burkina Faso and Mali. It is part of a larger African conversation about independence, dignity, and the right to choose one's own path.
In the final part, the focus will turn to what comes next and whether this dramatic moment will lead to lasting change or deeper uncertainty for the Sahel and the world.
As the dust begins to settle after the announcement, the key question now is what the future holds for Burkina Faso, Mali, and the wider Sahel region. The decision to ban Americans marks a turning point, but it is only the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter. The choices made in the coming months will shape security, diplomacy, and daily life for millions of people. Leaders in Ouagadougou and Bamako say they are prepared to face the consequences of their decision. They argue that rebuilding strong, independent states requires difficult choices and a clear break from policies they believe failed in the past. Their message is clear: national dignity and control over security come before foreign approval. Supporters see this as a moment of courage, while critics fear it may lead to deeper isolation. Security remains the biggest test. Armed groups are still active, and the loss of Western support could create new challenges. Sahel governments insist that alternative partnerships and stronger regional cooperation will fill any gaps. Whether these new arrangements can deliver better results will be closely watched by Africa and the international community. Diplomatically, there is still room for change. The United States has not completely closed the door, and future dialogue remains possible if trust can be rebuilt. However, any renewed cooperation would likely look very different from the past, with clearer limits and stronger demands for mutual respect. For Africa as a whole, this moment carries deep meaning. It reflects a growing desire among some states to redefine their place in the world and resist external pressure. If successful, it could encourage other countries to speak more boldly. If it fails, it may serve as a warning about the risks of confrontation in a deeply connected global system. For the world, the Sahel is becoming a symbol of changing global power. The struggle is no longer just about security, but about influence, respect, and the future of international partnerships. What happens next will help define Africa's role in a rapidly shifting world order, making this story far more than a regional dispute.
As reactions continue to spread, it is becoming clear that the decision by Burkina Faso and Mali carries a message far beyond their borders. This is not only about banning Americans or ending certain forms of cooperation. It is about power, respect, and who gets to decide Africa's future. For many observers, this moment reflects a deeper shift in how some African nations now see the world and their place within it. Across the Sahel, the move is being discussed as a symbol of resistance against what leaders describe as long-standing imbalance in global relationships. Supporters believe it shows that African states, even those facing serious challenges, are willing to take control of their own destiny. They argue that true partnerships must be based on equality, not pressure, and that Africa has the right to say no when it feels its interests are being ignored. At the same time, international experts warn that symbolism alone is not enough. They say the real test will be whether Burkina Faso and Mali can translate this bold political stance into real improvements in security, governance, and economic life. If conditions improve, the decision could be remembered as a historic turning point. If not, it may deepen instability in an already fragile region. The story also forces the global community to reflect. For Western powers, it is a reminder that influence can no longer be taken for granted. For emerging powers, it is an opportunity, but also a responsibility, to show that their engagement truly benefits local populations. For Africa, it is a moment of choice, balancing pride and independence with the realities of a connected world. As this chapter unfolds, one thing is certain: the Sahel is no longer silent. Its leaders are speaking loudly,
and the world is listening. Whether this leads to a more balanced global order or greater uncertainty will depend on what comes next. What began as a breaking news story is now shaping a much larger debate about Africa's future and the changing face of international power.